And this is like the juiciest conversation, the juiciest topic, honestly, in my career in beauty, because the plot just kept thickening throughout the whole summer. And I can't believe that the initial headline from Joyce just dropped like, what was it, June? Like it feels like
Mid-June.
it feels like it's been like years. So I guess maybe I will get started with the conversation. So like, for anyone who hasn't been paying attention, I feel like the healthy thing that most people were doing was like not paying too close of attention. Like I feel like that's healthy. Some
What is that
people
good?
like us were paying, especially you guys were paying a little too close attention. So what's happened and how did we get here? Hannah, do you wanna go first?
I can, yes. So, Choice, we have the magazine that they do testing on all kinds of things, but every few years or so, they'll take some sunscreens just from the shelf, have them SPF tested at their own trusted lab, and then publish the results. And it's always like a lot of them don't meet what their labeled SPF is. And so there's always a scandal when they do it, I feel. But in this instance, one of them tested at SPF 4 and it was labeled at SPF 50 plus, if I recall correctly. Not 50, 50 plus, big difference. Uh, and so the uproar, and I think to compound that, the brand in question, Ultraviolet, is very like social forward. And so people just like started mobbing, you know? Would you agree, Michelle?
Yeah, so yeah, Choice, they tested 20 sunscreens this time. I think the last time they did it was 2015 or 16, when they tested 6. And back then, it was a very different place on the internet. Social media was really not that big a thing. And I think they might have misjudged how they framed it because of that. They really weren't expecting this sort of reaction. So, from what I understand, they tested it maybe 6 months before the results came out, and they reached out to Ultraviolet before, telling them that they found this problem. So, yeah, they published their results in June with all the brand responses at the bottom. And most of them were pretty bland, standard PR friendly responses. And then Ultraviolet had a rather long response compared to everyone else. And they cast doubt on Choice's testing. Like most of the other brands, they said, we'll look into it. Your health is our top concern, that sort of standard stuff. But Ultraviolet, they had one where they said it had to be human error. There was a mix-up of samples. I'm paraphrasing here, so yeah, there had to be a mix-up of samples. Maybe the decanting was what messed it up. The lab wasn't GMP approved or something. Um, and they also said things like, I think it was also just the tone of it. They said it was scientifically impossible that their sunscreen tested that low. They said things like they were disappointed in Choice, it was fear mongering and misleading. Yeah, so the social media response is what came next, which is it was very much Choice versus Ultraviolet. Um, and then I guess since then, what's happened? Choice ended up releasing the full Dermatest reports at 6:30 p.m. on a Google Drive. I think, yeah, it was pretty clear they didn't expect that sort of response. And then the Australian TGA has given a whole bunch of updates. Um, and then a little bit later, I think about 2 weeks later, the ABC, which is our national broadcaster, they released an article saying that 8 of the sunscreens that were tested that failed their SPF claims, failed in quotation marks. I don't love the framing of failed, which I'm sure we'll get into. 8 of these sunscreens were tested by one lab called Princeton Consumer Research. And since then, there's been a whole bunch of recalls of different sunscreens. Turns out the ultraviolet sunscreen that did really poorly, Lean Screen, that was a white label formula produced by a lab called Wildchild, or a contract manufacturer, and that shares the same base formula as I think about 20 other sunscreens. And so most of those have also been recalled. This is like a very slowly evolving story. I think it went from July until, I guess it's fast in terms of recalls. Like it went from July until
Last
maybe
week.
like early October. Whole bunch of recalls. Still in the process of doing that. Some of them haven't been recalled yet, but the TGA has said that they don't expect the SPF will be over 21 for any of these formulas. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of where we're at.
It feels like maybe somebody told Ultraviolet, one of the consultants told them that it was scientifically impossible, because that's a pretty bold statement to have an SPF so low with a given percentage of zinc oxide. Oh man, when I first started that saw that statement. Brian, perhaps you have a different perspective or more to add from, you have a unique perspective, really interesting backstory, not only from the testing arena, but also the companies you've worked with and had experience with. So yeah, from your point of view, is there anything missing there? What's else happened?
Sure. So I think one of the things that was the most unique here with this particular consumer awareness initiative on Choice's part is that there was a prevalence of results from the same lab that all weren't quite up to label claim. Michelle, like you, I don't like using the word pass or fail because you're actually not passing or failing. You're hitting a target. If you're getting a target SPF, there's still a result. So you might not achieve your specific marketing goals, but at least you made some stable filters that made it to the skin and provided some semblance of protection. So it's really not a pass fail test, which is something that oftentimes in the industry brands look at it as. So the trouble is if you're pushing a product and you get all your labeling done before you do your actual in vivo SPF testing, and then you're pushing for a target of an SPF 50, when you come back at a 46 or a 45, it's a fail in that regard. But if you had tested that product earlier before you printed all your labels and you got your marketing materials done, it wouldn't be a fail. You'd be able to position the product the correct way in the market. So in this case, what happened is you had a large prevalence of test data that was supported by the same third party. And I don't think I've ever seen that before in previous choice or consumer advocacy retests. Usually you'll get a handful of European labs, a handful of American labs, some other multinational sites where the data is coming from, but here you had a really sort of high frequency of data where the target SPFs or the label SPFs were being missed, and the data was all sourced by the same site, Princeton Consumer Research. And one of the things which I think is sort of really interesting to look at is the initial the ultraviolet formula, which I guess kind of started it all, that wasn't testing beyond 4 initially. The PCR reports which were shown are actually self non-compliant with TGA standards. So they set out to define a protocol following what's listed as TGA standards, where you're supposed to apply a product and conduct exposures with UV radiation, and then 16 to 24 hours you're meant to evaluate with the human eye with a trained observer the erythemal response. To summarize, that's where the SPF label claims are really coming from compared back to baseline. And in the method in the report, the applications and exposures appear to have been done on a Tuesday, and the evaluations were done on a Friday. So, at least in that one report, there's a clear noncompliance. The erythemal responses would have healed for an extra 2 full days, an extra 48 hours. The sunburn or the erythema would have dissipated. And this is an actual reason why the numbers could be so far off.
Oh man.
That's crazy.
So there is so much to this topic. I am
Yeah.
struggling as the person trying to have a cohesive conversation because there's so many different angles going on, from like the questionable stuff from the testing, but then also like the things that I saw on social media was just, honestly, it's some of the most bizarre behavior I've ever seen. First from Ultraviolet's response, and then there was this like brigade of influencers. It was really weird coming to Ultraviolet's defense. It seemed like really unique compared to like previous companies have had like question marks about all this stuff, like a conglomerate. Oh my gosh, can you imagine the backlash that there would be on social media? But then for this company, it was just so weird. So Hannah and Michelle, can you bring us up to date? Especially for like, there's going to be like a lot of industry people who don't spend too much time on TikTok and Instagram, but what was happening on these platforms during this time?
Well, sorry. So let's go back. There were influencers just like, random Australian makeup girls. I'm one of them sometimes, and some people were posting that they were like using their ultraviolet sunscreens in defiance of choice results, for example. So it'd just be like a short TikTok that's like, I'm using this because choice sucks or whatever. And then the comment sections would be crazy, which then of course sends it to more people to look at. So they were getting out of control. Even yesterday there was a video doing the rounds because they didn't like a comment Ultraviolet made, and so there was a whole video about that, and the comments are mostly just saying, oh, their response has been so inappropriate even to this day. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
People turn into mobs and they don't really understand how any of this works.
Yeah, I think overall, I completely agree. There's like a lot of the responses. I think the most frustrating thing is just lots of people picking a team and speaking very decisively based on incomplete information. I think is like the overarching theme of everything. So you had people attacking choice. I guess with Ultraviolet's response, as well as like their long response that was published with the choice article. Their founder, one of their founders, Ava, also posted a sort of like teary looking apology video, which I think is very influencer era. Like, I don't know if you've heard of this whole like apology video trope where, you've got slightly messy hair, you look like you've been crying, and you do a very honest looking, impromptu, informal looking video. And it was kind of in that sort of vein. And I think, yeah, it's very influenced by this sort of influencer era genre, I guess. So yeah, you had a whole bunch of people coming out attacking choice in defense of Ultraviolet, and then you also had the other mob, which was like a whole bunch of people defending choice and attacking Ultraviolet. And I think honestly both sides were pretty unfair because, as we know now, there's been a whole bunch of fraud going on, which was a complete third party. So I know that choice said they got attacked by people, they had to block people, which, like, I mean, Australia, they're an Australian institution. In Australia, they're very well respected. They're people who work with the government. They just publish things. Like they're an old school sort of organization, and they don't know how to handle social media. Whereas Ultraviolet, they're very social media savvy. They have lots of relationships with influencers, and I guess like they have a parasocial relationship as well, in a sense, with a lot of influencers and people on social media. So these are people who see Ultraviolet as, their friends. They're part of, I guess, almost like quote unquote a girl squad. They have a very particular identity that people identify with, and they use like the products are part of their identity. It's very close to their personality. And so, yeah, it was a very interesting sort of situation. Sorry, that was
People
very
think that
rambly. Feel free to cut whatever, Jen.
people just think that brands are their friend,
Yeah.
and like
I
that's
mean,
a company. That's
and that
not.
works well. It's a really good marketing strategy. Like people will buy things because, even if they don't need it, because they feel like, if I buy this as part of my identity. And we kind of see this with Taylor Swift at the moment as well. I feel like it's a very good parallel there. Yeah, it's a very different type of marketing compared to standard.
Now flipping to, we're going to be going back and forth here. We'll see how this goes with my
This could be
approach
a whole
for
season.
questions here. Yeah, I could have a whole season dedicated to this topic. There's so many different angles,
Okay,
but something that
sign
I
up.
heard through the grapevine is that consultants were giving brands suggestions around using this testing lab preferentially compared to other labs because they were more reliable, because they consistently gave better results. So, Brian, thoughts? And this, like, honestly is kind of I'm foreshadowing an answer here, but it's kind of painful to hear because then, like, brands, if my audience doesn't know, I've got a mix of audience that some are in industry and some are not, but the brands aren't the technical experts, and then they have to trust their consultants.
Mhm.
And like maybe they don't have the right capacity to vet things. Um, yeah, what's going on with this, Brian?
I would say that with testing labs, the thing that people should look for, brands should look for in the long run, is reliability, and that doesn't just mean consistent results. With transparency, I don't just mean they're going to let you walk through the door and see what they're doing. That should actually be something that's just readily apparent. You should be allowed to walk into any CRO who's doing work and conduct a physical audit or send a third party to do that without question. What I actually mean is that labs should actually be telling brands or ingredient suppliers, no, that timeline's not going to work. A good lab or CRO relationship should involve back and forth and multiple potential sites or companies at different spots around the world, because no lab should continuously be cheaper, faster, with higher results than the other labs, especially if you're talking about smaller, privately held clinical institutions. Groups like Eurofins or SGS or ALS have many sites all around the world. They should have some type of cost or timeline advantage most of the time. Small labs should be able to win out with customer service and sort of like a white glove luxury boutique style service as their core competency. But if they're faster, they're cheaper, or they're always giving you better results, or people are saying you'll get higher results if you go there, it should be the biggest red flag that you can possibly look for.
Oh man, I've had conversations with other people who do testing. Rania Ibrahim is another person who has brought this up where, like, it's challenging as especially a smaller brand because I know in product development, when I talk about like the costs associated with some of this testing, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't afford that. Oh, they start to have conversations with different labs, and then they see the price tags associated with it. They just look around, and their budget is slim as a smaller brand, and so it's tempting to just go for what's cheaper because that translates to accessible. And then also this like uncertainty, this conversation comes up when I am working with small brands of like expectations around results. Like you test for a reason because you don't know what it's going to be. You have to find it out, and you may need to alter things. That's just how it works. But I
Absolutely.
feel like that's when indie brands think about it, it's like, how can I possibly weather that? Like when we're talking about some of this testing, it's like tens or more of thousands of dollars. So
Mhm.
much money. So, like, when I looked at all of this, it kind of seemed like there were more indie brands that were getting wrapped up in all of this. Um, what are some of the specific challenges for indie brands on this? And would you agree with my assessment that maybe more smaller brands were wrapped up in all of this mess?
I think that at the moment, small and smaller indie brands are the ones who have sort of been named here. But I would kind of preface with a shock statement that, by my understanding, back in 2017, when I worked there into 2017 or 2018, Princeton Consumer Research was probably doing 1 or 2% of its total sales in the Australian market. So the last thing I want to do in any way is cause a big sort of consumer panic. But I mean, there's been some commentary about how this is not necessarily going to impact American consumers in a big way. Princeton Consumer Research's largest market is the United States, and our second biggest market would be Europe. So we haven't yet gotten out of like TGA focus at this time. In many ways, TGA was extremely proactive, and it looks like they actually commented before the ABC bombshells even sort of came out, which is, I think, a really good precedent for a government agency to set. But realistically, we're seeing the smaller and the indie brands and the Australian local groups and contract manufacturers who are connected. We're not yet seeing the crux of the market that this could theoretically be impacting.
That is a really interesting point in terms of like overseas media reporting I've seen on it, where it's like, well, we don't want to have what happened to Australia to happen to us, and this is how our brands can avoid it. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, your brands have been using this lab, and I would put money on the fact that there are plenty more global products that are going to have this exact issue. And if
Mhm.
I were a brand that had used them and were using a formula like that, I'd be making moves, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think also there's a lot of parallels with the earlier case, which was actually Choice's last set, where a bunch of products failed, and they all were mostly tested at AMA labs. And AMA labs, obviously, maybe it's less obvious to people who are less old, but they were also found to have been doing a bunch of fraud. A guy went to jail. A whole bunch of other people got fined. Yeah, and some of these people are still operating in the industry, which is quite disturbing. But yeah, it was exactly the same sorts of things. This was a lab that was known for being cheap, fast, and always gave you good results.
Mhm.
And from my background, which has largely been staring at research fraud for the last couple of years, yeah, getting good results that you expect, getting very neat results, that is a massive red flag for research fraud. And just looking at the red flags in these reports, it's exactly the same. Like in science, you are not meant to get the results you expect all the time. But a lot of people who might not have that much experience in science, such as brands who need to hire scientific consultants, they see that as a good thing because you don't pay very much and you get a good result. And I guess also, like, one of the issues is that the risk of this happening is pretty low. I mean, we haven't had a quote unquote scandal like this in sunscreen for a pretty long time. And most of the weight has fallen on ultraviolet. Like, I actually feel quite sorry for them because they have become sort of like the fall guy for everything when PCR, like Brian said, tests so many sunscreens on the market.
Mhm.
They've been extremely unlucky that they were the people who've become the poster child of this.
Like, if Choice had
Now,
picked
this
up
might
any, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, this might be an unkind question, but part of, as far as I understand, part of quality control and building quality systems around your product developments, the responsibility, like this is a responsibility of anyone who places a product on the market to um, vet their testing? Like, that's part of it. They can't just trust their whoever it is. It's like just trusting some sketchy contract manufacturer. Something that goes wrong and you didn't go and look at that. Well, like, is it really anyone else's fault other than it's a lots of people's fault, but it really is the brand's fault. It's the responsibility to this might be an unpopular, unkind, I'm sorry. This might be an unkind question, but like, is it not, Brian? Or is it, maybe I'm going to frame it in a nicer way.
Mhm.
Would you say that it is the responsibility of companies to audit, vet anyone they're working with? And if they don't have the tools to do that, to make sure that they have people in their network they're consulting with who do have the tools to vet whoever they're working with, to ensure that they're, for example, giving reputable SPF testing or whatever the other thing that they're testing, like preservative testing. Make sure you're doing that right. Working with the right contract manufacturer. Make sure the quality systems are in place. Make sure, like, across the board for product development.
Mhm.
Thoughts?
It's 100% the responsibility of a brand to some degree. However, the with GMP systems in particular, there's a lot of leeway from regulatory. So you're allowed to set your own audit requirements and what exactly it means, how far you're going to go, whether you're going to go on site or you're just going to review somebody's SOPs. So it is 100% a brand's responsibility to do some form of audit of all of their GMP or OTC level suppliers here in the US. There's pretty similar standards with TGA, but they're a little bit loose, which is what I think part of the big problem here actually is. And with a lab like Princeton Consumer Research, in the past, they have purported to have been ISO 9001 certified, which is a quality management system certification. They've also purported to have been FDA registered. And I think something that most brands probably have no idea about is that you can actually go on the FDA's website and search for current drug establishments for any lab on the planet. And this is only for GMP, FDA facing stuff. So it's not quite the same for TGA in Australia. But if there's a CRO or an analytical lab that has operations within the US and they're testing in any way OTC or drugs, you should be going as the brand at a bare minimum onto the FDA's website and finding an active registration for the physical sites that are testing your product. And for everybody's clarity, one certification does not give blanket approval for a company or a multinational entity to test at all of its sites. Each site must have its own registration. So I think it's very difficult to sort of get through the nuance. And I'm hoping with some of like the communications that we all can work on with the scientific community and the industry, we can push people towards hitting some bare minimum checklists. So you should be asking about SOPs. If you can somehow, you should be going out to the site or sending a third party researcher, third party investigator for like a GMP or a GCP conduct or GLP if it's analytical. It's not necessarily cheap to be able to do that, but I could tell you for sure it's a whole lot less expensive than a multi-million-dollar recall, which is the alternative, and it is the brand's responsibility.
Honestly, this is why when it comes to sunscreen, typically, I mean, for other products, I'll like use more indie products, but for sunscreens, I usually go with the big guys. Maybe this is an unpopular thing, but this is just what I do because I know they have a lot more money to do things like this, and doing things like this is very expensive. The other people on this panel may not agree with me, but that's my point of view on this. But I'm going to Michelle is so she's not sure if she agrees with me. So there's a diversity of opinions. That's just fine. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Michelle and Hannah. Brian, I don't know if you want to comment on this. You don't have to, unless you have some juicy story that you feel obliged to share. What is some of the most daft brand behavior that you've observed throughout this whole mess?
Well, I have been making little videos, basically just not regurgitating, but hey, TGA made a press release. This brand said this, keeping it quite factual, not putting any like real judgment into it, maybe a little bit here and there, but like nothing like these outragey. I'm just trying to keep it like chill so people who are freaking out can. Sometimes they take it poorly anyway, but there are brands commenting being like, well, you should try our sunscreen. And it's like, you guys, not now, like not now. Or we had like a UPF umbrella brand that was like, you should use umbrella. And it's like, look, yeah, I think there's a conversation to be had about other strategies. Like you don't just put a dab of sunscreen on and then become immune to the sun forever, you know, and I think people are treating it like that's the case. But not now. Not now. Please. Like just I've been a little bit impolite to brands leaving comments like that because it's like, this is not, yeah, get a grip.
And I think that sort of thing bites people in the ass as well. Like, there were a number of brands who were capitalizing on Ultraviolet's, I guess, quote unquote downfall. So, should I name names? I don't know if I should name names, Jen.
Oh man, maybe I'm just gonna name a name because it was so egregious. And I think she listens to my podcast, but it was just so bad. Put out their testing results.
Yeah, they did like a series of videos where they were saying, this is how you avoid a situation like Ultraviolet. You do this. And it was basically just testing in 2 labs. And then they showed their testing results. So I think what they did was like back when AMA happened, yeah, a lot of people, including me, was saying like one way you could avoid this interlab testing variability / potential fraud problem is by testing in more than one lab. But there's more nuance to it. Like Brian was saying, like it's not just, you know, test in 2 labs, it's test in 2 labs that aren't sus. And just sort of took the easy route and just tested in 2 labs. And to me, both sets of results look sus, in my opinion. One of them is from PCR. The other one, I mean, just looking at the numbers, they look a bit too nice. And I know they must have seen the PCR stuff, but I think they might just be pretending to not notice because right now the US brands are slipping under the radar with this issue. And there were also a couple of other brands. These ones, I guess they weren't as blatant, they weren't as consumer facing, but they were launching like kind of like sunscreen education sorts of campaigns. But if you know what you were looking for, like some of the things they were saying were very, very silly. Like one brand owner. They don't have a sunscreen yet.
Apparently, she's thinking about launching what I heard.
They're in the process of launching it, of making their own sunscreen for launch, and they were just posting a lot of things about how they approach testing and they were attacking choice and comparing choice to the EWG, and then saying like, really, everyone should be testing on 20 people because that gives greater statistical significance. Except there's no 2 groups that are being compared in an SPF test. It's not a clinical trial. It's not a standard medical clinical trial.
Some clinicals have that only 20 participants anyway. Like you'd be surprised, right? Like some drugs.
Yeah, but like
small trials.
It's just entirely the wrong term for it. Like it's not statistical. Like statistical significance is not a thing here.
No.
It's a completely different sort of statistical test. But yeah, just very confidently saying this, and I tried to correct her, and she just disagreed. And it's like, well, I mean, I know she has 0 science qualifications. Why is she so confident when she's talking to someone with much more science like background? And yeah,
you weren't doing it to be mean.
it was like I was trying to hint. I was trying to be nice, and I was trying to hint, like, maybe you will not, maybe you will regret saying these things. I've been trying to be very nice to everyone, and telling people, maybe this is not the best idea. Hinting. I've been DMing people the PCR article, for example, hinting to them they should
Me
maybe,
too.
rethink their results. And yeah, unfortunately, I feel like this is part of I feel like a big part of this is brands assume they have expertise they don't. And it's become very, very clear throughout this whole thing that a lot of brands do feel like they have expertise. And I think this is part of this trend of where brand owners are trying to look like experts because people trust experts. Experts are like the trending thing right now in beauty marketing. And so looking like an expert is a very lucrative choice for people. And people are doing this and trying to capitalize on this. And unfortunately, if you do this, like a lot of people did think Ultraviolet were sunscreen experts. They are a sunscreen only
They are
brand.
in a way.
I don't know I don't know, Hannah, you might know that. Like, do they really put themselves forward as experts? I haven't really been paying attention.
No, I mean, I think, they've been developing sunscreens for a number of years at several different Australian companies, for those who aren't aware, and respected ones too. And so,
Ones that
I
did well
think,
in this test.
sorry.
One that did well in this test.
Yes. And so that would bring a type of expertise, but I don't think they've ever positioned themselves as such, apart from that information being not difficult to find. And I don't know if we'll cover this later, but like the fact that they've positioned their brand as a kind of, you should be wearing sunscreen. It's fun. It's cool to wear it. Like that. I have a lot of time for that. And I think you couldn't do that if you were doing a more like, say, buttoned up brand. Like these bigger, more serious brands can't really do that more like fun looking stuff. This is a tangent. But
I feel like
there's
it's a
space
tangent,
for that.
though.
Like,
Sorry.
can
I
you
feel
be
like
an
this is building
expert and be fun? Like, I don't know. Can you?
I feel like this is building off what Jen was saying with like brands. And I feel like maybe Hannah and I have a bit of a different perspective on whether small brands should be making sunscreens and whether that's like a positive influence on the market, because both of us have been quite involved in looking at what increases uptake of sunscreen use in Australia amongst younger people who are less receptive to public health campaigns. And yeah, the things that a lot of public health campaigns assume, like, if people know that skin cancer is a problem and sunscreen prevents it, they will use sunscreen. That just doesn't work in public health messaging.
People smoke.
What actually does is things like behavioral. Well, first off, believing that the behavior will actually prevent skin aging, skin cancer, but also normative beliefs. Like if you feel like people around you expect you to wear sunscreen, if your friends are wearing sunscreen, if people you admire are wearing sunscreen, if sunscreen seems cool, this is a massive influence on whether or not you're going to wear sunscreen. And another one is also perceived behavioral control, which is like if you feel like you know how to wear sunscreen, you understand how to incorporate it in your day, you know how to buy a sunscreen that works, that is a massive influence on actually doing it. So yeah, like I feel like a lot of these smaller brands are very influential in this space for these reasons, and also with things like texture. So Hannah and I did a survey a while back, along with a third influencer called Minnie, who she's very knowledgeable about the Australian market, and she's also a moderator of the Australian skincare subreddit, where a lot of this stuff has been going down. And yeah, so we have a lot of, I guess, we have a lot of insights on this whole issue with that perspective as well. But yeah, like one of the biggest reasons people don't wear sunscreen is because of texture problems. And so if these small brands are a stepping stone towards people wearing sunscreen more every day, which I think they are, because Ultraviolet, it is a very makeup friendly brand with the sunscreens that they've retested with higher SPF. So yeah, I think this also pushes a lot of the bigger brands towards developing more I guess, consumer-friendly products. Like La Roche-Posay recently launched a sunscreen that seems to be trying to emulate smaller Korean brands. So I think, yeah, like I do think small brands have a big role in the sunscreen market, even if they might not be products that you would wear if you're planning to go to the beach and swim all day. Yeah, sorry, that was a tangent, but I feel like it was a interesting tangent.
I think
Relevant.
kind of to tie together the points there, the most egregious thing that brands can do now, and some potentially are doing. I won't name brands for sure. I'm going to be super brand agnostic, but the most egregious thing that brands can do is a combination of purporting to be an expert on some of the science, like you're just talking about, Michelle, and then in tandem with that, it's doubling down on the fact that they couldn't have been aware that something like this was potentially going on. I think the best thing that brands can do right now is sort of quietly retest and start phasing out any products that they know may be sort of interest. Having been a prior employer of PCR, I mean, I know a lot of the brands who could potentially be at risk here, and I would call on them to voluntarily retest, not recall, retest, see if you fall within the right area at least. You owe the public that much. And if you don't come back efficacious, then the next decision is on you. And on top of that, brands that have recalled and sort of gotten ahead of this, like Ultraviolet got a lot of slack. But I do think that, like, messaging aside, they did actually go through the right steps. And brands that do recall and get safer, effective products that they have retested out shouldn't all be sort of compartmentalized as evil, because they actually are doing the right thing. So, any US companies who get ahead of it and act soon before anything sort of comes through the pipeline officially are doing the right thing.
It's interesting because some of the Reddit commenters will be like, oh, well, yeah, they did recall it before the government made them, but it's because they knew the government was going to make them and they wouldn't have done it on their own. It's like, God, I think
There's no
you can't win
winning.
with a lot of people. Yeah.
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 Okay, so we just went through some of the Daft brand behavior, and you started talking about some people who are influencers as well. Um, along our along our journey here, there were quite a few influencers who were speaking very authoritatively and inaccurately about what was happening. And I will say, throughout this whole mess, Hannah and Michelle were like the voice of reason to me on social media. You did a really good job throughout this whole drama, but you were unique in my experience from what was coming up on my feed. It was quite troubling. So would you be able to give us some examples of this? And, I think that for people who were paying attention, this mess, if you look closely enough, is a really good way to sort through people who are legitimate experts and not actual experts, and maybe people who've built a platform as experts by, for example, plagiarizing subject matter experts on social media. It's a real big problem, and Michelle and I have had a post about this a little while ago. Just side note. But yeah, can you give us some examples of what was happening?
I think
Should
I
I
tried to
delete
make
that point about plagiarism? I stand by it.
no, but I did, as a side note, notice there's been some you know how there's that Vanessa's LED masks blog post. It's very good, and a lot of posts I see about LED masks seem to echo very similar points and wording, and that's interesting because there's been no credit there. So yeah, there's a bit of plagiarism. It's really frustrating when you notice someone doing that to your friend, but in general. Like, it's not that hard to say my sources were these, especially if you're providing information this serious. It's literally not that hard. Like I, tried to put screenshots of like articles that I was getting info from, highlighting the words, and like it took a little while, but all videos take a little while to edit. I think also probably people were getting a lot of DMs asking them to make a video. Because I was, and also I tried to make them because I knew Michelle works harder than I do, I think. And I just wanted to give her a bit of reprieve. I'm like, all right, I'll get onto it. That might give you a day or two. That's really my contribution here. I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
No, I think, your posts were great. I think people do want to hear things from, their usual information sources. And I think, I think your posts were great. They were very responsible and they were very balanced. And I think part of that is because, like, you and me and Minnie, we were having all these conversations as well. Like, we were talking to each other and we were getting basically a second opinion on what we were saying before we said it. And I think that's really important, like this sort of collaboration where you try to get a balanced view. But of course, like, trying to get a balanced view is, I mean, Jen, you are like one of the best people at this. Like, you know who to talk to. But a lot of people don't know who to talk to. They don't get a balanced view. And I think that's what happened to a lot of these influencers. Like, comparing Choice to the EWG, I know a lot of people were saying this, and these were mostly overseas influencers who don't know what Choice is like in Australia. It's quite different from Consumer Reports and Which, I think. Like, Choice work with the government. They do a lot of sensible government advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they were one of the reasons that the TGA back in the day, they acted on the AMA Labs report. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the way Australia works is, because we're a
We
small
love
country,
rules.
we don't have that much funding for regulators. Sometimes it takes a lot of effort to get anything done. And Australia, like, I guess we're kind of like a conservative country in that sense as well.
We pretend to not be, but we are.
Yeah,
We
like
tend to
in
be
terms
laid
of,
back.
yeah, we're
Culturally.
laid back, but that also means like we're lazy when it comes to changing things. And so sometimes you do need like a bit of shit stirring. Um, and I mean, Choice were quite responsible in, I mean, I don't love a lot of their framing. Like, I hate the word failed, because as well as things like fraud and this kind of thing, there's also a lot of interlab variability that people just aren't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like taking one SPF test as gospel, like the true test is just not, that doesn't really work. But anyway, yeah, like they invested, I think, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it was like tens of thousands of dollars into doing this SPF testing. They're not just like the EWG where they, stir pseudoscientific shit. There is like a real problem behind this. And without a consumer advocacy group like Choice doing these sorts of tests, I don't think anything would have been done. Anyway, so a lot of influencers were sledging Choice because they just have no idea what sorts of things they do. One particular influencer who owns a brand that is developing a sunscreen, she was comparing Choice to the EWG. She was saying the way that Choice went about this is not going to get any systemic change done. Well, this was after the TGA released a statement. And so it's just, lots of very confident proclamations based on incomplete information that, I mean, if she talked to me or Hannah or Minnie, we would have very easily told her that this was not right. And I think part of it is also because, Ultraviolet do have a lot of friends in high places. They're friends with a lot of other small brand owners that are stocked in Sephora, for example. I saw them posting some photos from a Sephora event during this where they were sitting next to a couple of big influencer brand owners who have made posts about this topic. So I assume there was discussion in the background.
And
But
it's like you have your discussion with your sunscreen brand founders to try and figure out what's going on from their side. But then you also want to have a discussion with, someone that's maybe not as brand friendly to get their take on it before you're publishing opinions. Maybe. Also, again, like, brands aren't our friends at the end of the day. Like, yes, I like and respect these people. I would go out for dinner with them and things. But that's a person, not a company.
Maybe I'll just flip it back to Brian. Um, is there anything about SPF testing that people should know about? Like how it all works, some of the procedural issues that may, I don't know, have led to issues. It's fraud, so I don't know how you want to come at this question, but tell us more about SPF testing and like what people should know specific or related to what we're currently talking about.
One of the most sort of dirty quotes about SPF testing that I hate hearing that does have a semblance of truth is that it's as much an art as it is a science. I absolutely hate it every time somebody repeats that quote, but there is a kernel of truth in it because there's so many different pieces that all come into play between the repeatability of the application, different product formats, and spreading them evenly, um, the different Fitzpatrick skin types, and how the actual sort of erythemal responses occur, and then this interlab variability that comes up as a continuous race. It's known that there is significant interlab variability. It's actually often commented on as high as being 15 to 18% in some of the ring studies. And I think if that's something that labs and brands can all agree on, that the variability is that high, if you're gonna come back with a mean SPF of 48.1 from your SPF test, maybe you shouldn't be doing what the current standard for FDA or TGA is, which is dropping down to the nearest whole number. So maybe a 48.1 should actually be a 40, and you should be or a 41. You should be reducing it by the estimated interlab variability, because if it's a 40 or a 41, even if it is slightly higher than that, at least we know the consumer's protected to that level. It's sort of like a minimum. And if all brands could follow that, brands won't do it on their own until regulatory pushes something like that. But I would say if we know the variability is that high, that's something that could potentially push the industry towards safer, more effective products that are labeled appropriately for consumers. So I think that's kind of like a behind the scenes insight piece to sunscreen testing. I'm not going to jump into the methodology specifically. But yeah, is that something that fits the bill?
Yeah, I mean, it was a horrible question. So you answered my terrible question very well. I wanted to ask you about something about SPF testing. I had it on my page, but then as I started asking it, I'm not sure. I maybe
I have.
Sorry,
before I
can
move.
I jump in very quickly and just
Oh
add to
yes,
that?
yes, yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've heard through the grapevine that some people who work in SPF testing don't realize the interlab variability because I'm guessing they work in one lab and so they're not seeing the range. But for BPO ring testing, for example, if you have a formula with SPF 48, that can test as low as 36 or as high as 60, and that still
Yeah.
counts as satisfactory for
Mhm.
BPO ring testing. And so I think, yeah, there's a lot more. This is why I hate the pass fail thing because, like, if we're going to be generous to the brands, and we assume that the third party testing, you know, as generous as possible, then yeah, everything that claimed SPF 50 plus and tested as low as 36 could potentially be still SPF 50 plus in one test, even with no fraud. So yeah, yeah, um, yeah. Maybe cut this bit out, but I heard through the grapevine. Someone was told by a photobiologist who works in SPF testing that the variability should only be SPF 5, variability for SPF 50 plus, which is just not. I don't know what the hell that's based on, but anyway, yeah.
I think maybe like with the same grader who's
Mm.
using the same equipment, with the same site and the same lighting, you can probably get down to like 5 on a 50, which is within 10% or so. But interlab variability, it's going to be higher than that, which is why, again, I would really propose that whatever your mean SPF is, you should be labeling lower, not just the next lowest whole number, but lower, because it's never going to be more unsafe for the consumer.
That raises an interesting question. Like, you know how, okay, so Australia, we have, if it tests between SPF 50 and 60, then it's labeled SPF 50. And if it tests above 60, then it's 50 plus. So that is a huge difference, really, when it comes to choosing a product, like, especially given the variability we've just discussed. That's all, really. Just comment.
Maybe I'll ask one of my audience questions that is related to SPF testing. This is from Dollar Menu Diva, who asks, does each production batch need to be tested, or does a formulation get tested one time and never again? Brian?
Technically, the individual formulas are where the requirements are for testing. So a formula could be, there could be dozens or hundreds of batches if something hasn't been changed, sort of at its root formulation. Bigger companies, multinationals, obviously have deeper pockets. And if they change suppliers for ingredients, they will often retest, but that's not always in the cards for everybody. So I think a lot of products tend to be tested as the base formula and not at the batch level. It's not the same as other types of analytical or preservative testing where you have to pull stuff off the line every once in a while and test it. It's sort of more a one and done in the industry for the most part.
And now I'm going to ask my next question intentionally before I ask the question after, which might make people a little scared. So, my next question will be to Hannah and Michelle, and I mean, Brian, if you want to comment on this by all means. But what does all of this mean for consumer safety? Like, what should consumers take away of all of this be? And like, I think that there has been maybe some fear mongering I've observed from certain media outlets. I don't know if you would agree, where now the public is like, oh, pretty concerned about the safety of these products. So yeah, what should people know, and what should their like confidence be with just sunscreens just in general?
Well, I think it's really cemented for me anyway that we need to be using our other methods of sun safety, right? So I was reading a study. They surveyed like young people in Western Australia to see what kind of behaviors and sun safety practices were associated with more likely to be burnt. And it was staying indoors in the middle of the day when the UV is at the highest, because, you know, in Australia in summer, the UV can be 15 easily. A day like today, October, it's like the middle of spring, at least 5 in Melbourne, and we're like quite far south. So just like, not, you know, if you're going for your walk, don't go at 1 p.m. If you're going to the beach, don't go at 1 p.m. Go at 5 p.m. It's still beautiful. We have daylight savings. I love daylight savings. So it was staying indoors, seeking shade, then clothing, including sunglasses, a hat, and finally sunscreen. Because again, the people that are maybe using sunscreen as their main sun protection are the ones that maybe tend to think that that's going to do everything. This is speculation, but so interesting that, yeah, it's more about behavior than it is about a product. So that's important to know. I also like haven't enjoyed zinc-based sunscreens for the longest time. I don't think they're useless. I just don't enjoy them. I hate that metal smell that comes off them. You know, when you're wearing it and you can smell that like metal oxidizing smell. Oh, anyway, that I guess there's this whole cohort of people that demonize chemical sunscreens, but
Mhm.
I really like them. They give good protection. So there's that. I think there are a lot of myths around zinc-based sunscreens that cause people to choose them. That if people knew how they actually work or what the actual truth is, that maybe they would go for different formulas. That's it for me, I think. Do you have any? What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, I think, sunscreen, a lot of skin cancer researchers say sunscreen should be your last layer of protection, like your last line of defense. Even without fraud and even without the SPF, like the formula itself failing, there's so much user error involved, like applying enough. Most people do not apply anywhere near enough. Most people apply like half the required amount. Um, a lot of people, even people who seem to be very educated on sunscreen, are using products that are unlikely to give them adequate protection, like sunscreen sprays and sunscreen powders. Also, everyone misses a spot every once in a while. Yeah, you have spots where you have less sunscreen, you get burnt there. Um,
I got burnt
I
on
guess
my
other things to
hands.
know, Australian sunscreens are not worse than other sunscreens. We just have more data on them. It's sort of like with parabens, like we've got more safety data, so they look worse, but it's just because no one's tested the other ones. Um, from the data we have, the vast majority of Australian sunscreens do work very well. Like in the choice test, 19 out of 20 sunscreens were SPF 24 or over.
Mhm.
In the NAMBLE trial, they used SPF 16 and they almost halved the number of squamous cell carcinomas. In Australia, squamous cell carcinomas seem to have gone up, if anything. So clearly, people are not using the sunscreens that are on the market well enough. Yeah, so also the fact that 19 out of 20 sunscreens are getting much higher than like the highest protection sunscreen we had in the 90s. I think this goes to show that that final SPF test is not the only way that formulators have to make sure they're making a reasonably good SPF. Like there are ways, like you know what ingredients you need to put in it. You know what sorts of like film formers and stuff, how to make a high SPF sunscreen. There are also like informal SPF tests before that formula gets near the lab, like before the brand invests whatever amount of money into the testing. So yeah, like there are ways of making sure that sunscreens have high SPF and high water resistance before it gets to that testing stage. And I think some brands are probably cutting these corners and they really shouldn't be because yeah, interlab variability for potential fraud, you can't just rely on that number, but it's not the only thing people have. Um, Also, I've seen a lot of Australians saying they'll switch to overseas sunscreens, and that's just a terrible idea. Like, not only are Australian sunscreens so far with the empirical data demonstrably quite good, if you're buying sunscreens from overseas, a lot of the time between that country and Australia, um, it's not controlled. There's no temperature control. It could freeze. It could get really hot, and that's really bad for sunscreen stability. Like buying something in person is by far the safest way to make sure your sunscreen hasn't been exposed to conditions that would make it separate. Within Australia, there is, what's it called? Good distribution practice. Within most countries, there's good distribution practice where there is temperature control from the manufacturer to the store. Right now, I think in most places, the last mile isn't controlled. So if you buy it online and they ship it to you, but if you walk into a store, you know that sunscreen should not have gone through what they call a temperature excursion before it got there. Um, Whereas if it's shipping, if you're buying from courier, who knows what happened in between courier and you. Also, I saw people saying they would switch to like using parasols instead. And again, with what we know about behavioral science, like it might
You're
work,
really
but
going to
first off,
carry an umbrella. You're really going to do that the whole time
yeah,
and not sunscreen. You're really just going to hold that, have one hand occupied the whole time.
with everyone
Go on.
staring at you, like it's
Also,
yeah, normative beliefs. Like if you're sticking out, like peer pressure is so big. most people saying they're going to do this are not going to stick to it. Maybe a couple of people will, and good for them. But yeah, also umbrellas don't work as well as everyone assumes because UV bounces off things. Like most of the UV you get is actually from the sky bouncing the UV onto you, not from the sun directly. So
There's a study where they like had a sunscreen group and a beach umbrella group, and the beach umbrella group got more burnt because you should use both. Some got burned in each group. I can find that study if anyone would like to read it.
For consumer safety, I think it's the biggest thing right now without scare tactics and stuff. And there's been so much fear mongering. There are some things that we know are successful now. So, like, as an example, look how quickly test reports made it all over the internet in Google Drives when they were called for. So, I think right now, consumers have the power to call brands out and ask them to publish their SPF test data. Not just SPF, I mean, clinical and efficacy for skincare and cosmetics in general. For whatever reason, brands hide it like under their rug and they never sort of shout from the rooftops with the actual reports, with very few, I guess, very few exceptions. So, right now, for consumers to be safe, I think everybody should be calling for more direct publication of results. No matter what any brand will tell you, as we've all seen from reviewing these tests that are public, there's really no proprietary information within the test reports. You get a batch number, a lot number, a trade name, and then the actual active ingredients, not by concentration, even. There's not specific formulation details. So, if we want the industry to be safer, it should be more transparent. I don't know why brands aren't more open about where they test and what their results are.
So one reason is, yeah, I think there's like limits on what brands can claim in Australia. Like they can't actually share some of their testing because then it counts as like a unapproved claim for a medication. But the TGA has said that they're allowing, I'm not sure if it's all brands or some brands to release their results now. So yeah, it is moving in the right direction, I think.
Okay, so the scary question that I wanted to ask, the previous question first. Uh, is this about to explode out of Australia? Because, like, this lab has locations globally, correct? So, what's that going to look like, Brian?
Don't want to just flat out say, like, yes. I think it can be mitigated the most if brands listen now, like I was saying earlier, and they retest and try and get ahead of it. But most definitely, Australia represents a small portion of the global sales of this particular testing organization. On top of that, they purport to test medical devices, antiperspirants, and other skincare and cosmetics across the board. In my experience, which unfortunately is pretty direct in this case, where there's smoke, there's fire. And it's really up to brands to get ahead of it to make sure that consumers are as protected as possible. But it's definitely not going to stop with Australia, that's for sure.
So there, not weird nationalism coming out of me when I see Australian sunscreens like spoken about negatively. It's not just us.
You guys just got it first. Like you had the brunt of this by
Leaders.
happening to have a really proactive consumer sort of protection group with choice. Like we used to have more of that happening on a continuous basis in the US, but it's less common now. So, kudos to consumer protection and Australian regulatory for acting fast. The faster
and
this ends, like the better it is for everybody.
and it's just honestly, it's really disheartening to see the feedback that Choice got from this work. that is clearly impactful and will have long-term positive impacts on the sunscreen market, it will. If somebody is telling you otherwise, I would question them as an expert, quote unquote. Seriously. uh, I'm gonna ask some other questions that I got from the audience. Okay, so I, I think this one would be directed to you. Maybe I'm gonna ask two in a row, just because the both of them will be kind of directed to you, Brian. So the first one is from Genius in Madness, who asked, "What obligations do you think brands have to do ethical due diligence on their key suppliers?" I guess we kind of talked about this, so you can just like brush over that. But if you want to add anything, and then the other one is from Testaholic, who asks, what other legal repercussions are there for brands in Australia besides being forced to do a recall? Has anyone been fined? Are brands suing the labs they tested with? Or is the CM suing the labs? Who's investigating the lab, considering it's a US based company?
So I think the first question, the answer is fairly straightforward, which is that I stated that there is most definitely a responsibility of brands to be conducting audits. That doesn't mean that brands are experts when it comes to the actual conduct of said audits. But there are various companies throughout the world whose sole specialty is third party audits. So it is up to brands to be checking in on labs however they can. I mentioned the current drug establishment element, which is something everybody can look up. It is important for everyone to know that ISO 9001, again, it's a quality management system. It's also a company following its own self-governance rules. So it's not carte blanche. This is a good company that provides great service or high-end products. It should never be considered something like that. And something I keep seeing online, it's really important to know that ISO 9001 has nothing to do with the ISO test methods for sunscreen and SPF and UVA. Completely unrelated. So in terms of the sort of ability of labs, or sorry, brands to audit the international or the clinical testing labs, there is a responsibility, but they should rely on third parties wherever possible, unless they're big enough that they have a solid quality team with audit experience that's willing to travel to the third party sites. It's really difficult to find some of these inconsistencies and to parse through this data. It took me legitimately years before I started seeing what inconsistencies or data that's too good to be true even looked like. So if you have a small brand who's doing a handful of products every couple of years, those product development professionals are never going to become sunscreen testing experts. It's just not something that's going to happen. You have to be doing it day in and day out. So in terms of that piece of the responsibility, brands have it, but there's assistance out there to get these sort of external audits done. In terms of the response and the potential for fines, TGA is investigating. They've been very clear about it. They have and will comment that they're potentially not capable of directly auditing third party labs all over the world. It's not necessarily in the cards. I think at a minimum, something they can do is call upon the industry to potentially self regulate. If they can't do it themselves, at least loosen up the restrictions, like Michelle was alluding to about publication of test data. So, like, if you can't regulate as the regulator, then loosen the restrictions that limit the industry from doing a better job policing itself. Because, like you guys have seen, it's not always good or bad, but there's a lot of people out there who will definitely put their eyes on the stuff and, sort of see what's what. So I think as of now, TGA is investigating. The industry as a whole is reacting, and other regulatory agencies around the world will sort of follow suit as things move into different markets.
Now we're unfortunately kind of short on time. I am sorry this
I'm
conversation
sorry.
could go on for hours, but you know what? It's probably better. It's probably better we don't.
We can do a
Because
follow-up.
I don't know. We could, I mean,
There'll be
let us know in the
developments.
comments of this podcast. There will be developments. So, in the comments of this podcast, if you want to follow up, let us know and let us know the angle of that follow up, because there are just like, it's just a like a web of mess. So many different angles that we could have gone at, and you would have heard throughout this conversation that's like the struggles of me trying to moderate this conversation, going from like the social media brand drama to like the realities of the situation. There's a lot there. So I'll close this conversation with my final question, which is the same question I ask all my guests when they come on my podcast. Do you have any final take homes that you'd like to leave my audience with? And or are there any final points that you haven't had a chance to cover that you think is important for my audience to know?
I'm
Hannah?
sure the expert audience already know this, but I personally I feel like even though I know some types of science quite well, I feel like I got smarter when I learned to stop being arrogant about it and just start asking people questions. Ask experts. If they don't know, they should say, I don't know. And I would ask this person. That's what I would say if I don't know. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, I think there can be a lot of arrogance in science and it goes all the way up. And yeah, just deferring to relevant experts is a really good way to live your life, actually. So don't feel like you're stupid for asking people questions. Like that's how we people like helping each other, right? Like if someone asks you a question, you know the answer, you're kind of excited to answer it. So yeah, just we can all work together.
Maybe a suggestion in that I would give to my audience, because sometimes people don't know who the relevant experts are. Like, is an esthetician really the subject matter expert for this specific topic? Probably not.
If if touching skin
Probably it's
every
somebody
day
else.
is the question, then yeah. But yeah.
So think about who is actually the subject matter expert. I think that a challenge within the cosmetic space, especially when we get into the weeds of some of this testing stuff, it's such a interdisciplinary space, like massively interdisciplinary. People are so specialized in like a lot of it is behind the scenes from what the public is privy to. So then they just like have no idea. They just think dermatologists are the one true expert, or whoever is
Mhm.
louder on social media,
Mm,
whatever. So like try to learn a little bit. And this should be something you do across topics that you're trying to learn about. Like learn first, maybe, in my opinion, who the relevant subject matter experts are, because then you get to learn like what consensuses are amongst those
yeah.
people, and it's really hard to
Don't
do that
very
otherwise if you don't know who the right people to talk on these topics are. Because sure, you can find some weirdo saying whatever, but do they actually have the background of the thing that they're talking about? Okay. I just wanted to say that. Michelle?
Oh. I guess I think the biggest lesson from all this that everyone can take is maybe you don't have to post, like you don't have to comment on things. And if you do comment, you don't have to give a very strong opinion. You can
you can
you
report
like
facts.
and like I think it's like good to not just give the information, it's also good to give an idea of how certain that information is, because I think in terms of communication, this is just one of the things that a lot of scientists mess up. It's like they communicate the results, but not the certainty of the results. Um, but yeah, I think there's just been a lot of people giving very strong opinions that based on incomplete information, and it comes back to bite you in the ass, especially with a really complex area that requires a lot of interdisciplinary knowledge.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting, a point that Jess Stokes Parrish brought up on a roundtable about credible experts online that Michelle, Jess, and I did for my last e-summit. She brought up the word of epistemic humility. Like, some people have it and some people don't. And like, when they don't, like, maybe be critical of them. And like, I hate to use the like whole Dunning-Kruger thing because I don't think the phenomena is quite real, but there's something there. There's something there with certain people who maybe have poor epistemic humility and think that they're just like going to be experts on all the things, that then they inflate their ego, and then like, watch out for that. Red flag for subject matter expert when you're trying to find credible information sources. If that's a behavior you observe, maybe pause and ask
Yeah,
yourself, is
like,
that really the credible expert?
I feel like the more you know, the more you know that you don't know, right? Everyone that laughs at how Australians say no, I'm glad that I could do that for you.
Brian.
The message I would want to sort of leave off with is very much consumer facing. So I really think this is a time not to be afraid of sunscreens. Like Michelle had mentioned, the overwhelming majority of the stuff that was tested came out with 80% or more of its actual label SPF. So it's far from perfect, but it's much better than the alternative of not wearing it. Definitely pair it up with secondary protection. And what I'm saying secondary, I really mean primary. So bring the umbrella, don't stay out in the midday sun. Reapply now more than ever, because if you're reapplication just should be a no-brainer at the moment given the topic we're talking about. And then call on brands, because right now the industry is going to change and together we can make it for the better. I don't want to see this happen again in 5 or 10 years, with another third party lab. So if we can call for more transparency, we can rely on different experts who can look at, individual facets, and together we could comment on reports and what the trends are in the data. That's only going to help the consumer and the industry get safer.
And maybe I should say thank you to Choice. Thank you to Choice for being the ones to stimulate this conversation and the progress that you'll see to come.